In Doctor Who Flux Chapter 2, War of the Sontarans, the episode begins on black with the foreboding, toiling cloister bell of the TARDIS ringing ominously in the dark. When visuals return, the picture is monochrome, black and white, and is surely a vision or memory of the Doctor's past. There she stands in the middle of a desolate planet with nothing but a few trees scattered here and there to keep her company. No Yaz, no Dan, but a mangled and distorted house floating impossibly above the ground. Some fans have suggested that this house is Longbarrow House, from the book by Mark Platt, which was released in 1997. Essentially, if you don't know, Longbarrow is the Doctor's home. That's pretty much all I want to say about that, in order to avoid some convoluted explanation, but feel free to do some research of your own to find out more. Maybe that's what this series is going to deal with. If the Timeless Child storyline is just the beginning, Series 13 Flux could be diving deeper into the Doctor's past, for better or indeed for worse. What it all means is not clear, but the Doctor looks very concerned before waking up somewhere else entirely. But before we move on to that, I want to cover something I completely missed in part 1 of my breakdown, and that's the matter of Swarm. There were so many characters to deal with last episode, and in the rush to pump out my breakdown before Chapter 2's airing, I overlooked the crucial fact that Swarm, seen here, and Swarm, pictured here, are played by two different actors. I know! And of course, I got the name wrong. So, the Swarm here is played by Matthew Needham, that's old Swarm, and Swarm, the new Swarm that we're used to, is Sam Spruill. So what does that mean? Well, for starters, it makes the character of Swarm much more interesting. What occurred here was a regeneration. If these officers Zen Sentek and K-Tosks are members of the Division, and therefore Time Lords, it could mean that there is some shared DNA between them. Certainly, it appears that Swarm did regenerate, not too dissimilar to a Time Lord regeneration, possibly as a result of draining the officers of their life force. I bring this up now, not just because of my massive boo-boo, but because it will inevitably become crucially important to the plot, especially given what occurs at the end of this episode. Back to the start then. Here, on a blood-drenched battlefield, it is quickly established that after the events of the last episode, the Doctor, Yaz and Dan have fallen through time as a result of the Flux. But what time and where? We're introduced to Mary Seacole, a real person out of real history. The real Mary, pictured here, was born in Kingston, Jamaica, in 1805. Why is she famous? Well, this subject matter is quite contentious, so I'm going to steer clear of it, because I really do not know enough about it. But the gist of it is that she had an adventurous life, travelling across many lands to run businesses and help people in need. And some of that is shown in this episode. Personally, I felt that the actress Mandy Simmons, who played her, was really rather good indeed. Very austere, firm, and intriguing to say the least. After a few words with Mary, the Doctor deduces that they've somehow stumbled back to the Crimean War. But in this version of history, the Russians do not exist, replaced instead by, yes, you guessed it, the Sontarans. They've managed to invade Earth's history and create an alternative timeline where China and Russia no longer exist, and instead Earth's Sontaran stronghold Sontar has replaced them on the map. Sontaran leader Skak tells his soldiers, "Onward to domination! Sontar!" The Sontarans unleash their battle cry, and we are plunged into the opening titles. We are treated to quick flashes of Vinder escaping the destruction of Observation Outpost Rose, as witnessed in Chapter 1, before Vinder awakes from his nightmare in a strange golden corridor, a temple somewhere in space and time. He is approached by this fella, a priest triangle, who asks him, "Are you response? Can you repair?" In a large nave, Vinder is shown the Muri, a race of ancient guardians entrusted with keeping control of time. But their appearance is odd, and it changes when Vinder steps close due to a proximity detector, appearing and disappearing depending on how close he is. In the Crimean War, the Doctor, Yaz and Dan adjust to their new environment and are shown to Mary Seacole's British Hotel. It's then that Dan and Yaz start to fade from existence, falling through space and time due to the combination of flux and vortex energy. The Doctor attempts to go after them, but the TARDIS is malfunctioning and will not provide her a door. Last week we saw a sickness in the TARDIS where black goo and multiple doors were produced. So this is a fine way of developing this arc. The Doctor, it seems, is yet again abandoned. Dan ends up in Liverpool and discovers that his much-loved home city is under occupation. A Sontaran ship docked at the end of his street. While in awe of this peculiar sight, Dan is snuck up on by several Sontarans, who then trace him down the street, firing many lasers and missing every single one of them. For me, this scene did not work. Despite enjoying myself very much, it was at this point I started to notice a few issues I couldn't overlook. I began to wonder, for instance, why Yaz and Dan were required in the Crimea at all. If they had just woken up separated from each other, the episode would have begun much quicker and lost very little. In fact, there may have been room to better introduce Dan's parents, Neville and Eileen Lewis. For example, on learning of the Sontaran occupation, Dan is surely the type of character to go straight to his family and see if they're okay, and that is how they could have come into the story. Yaz appears in the same temple that Vinda arrived in earlier. I was a little worried that this episode would be just as disjointed as the first, but with Yaz arriving here, in the temple, I started to relax. I relaxed further at the arrival of Williamson, muttering under his breath.
How am I meant to cope? It insists on shifting.
It would seem from Williamson's dialogue that he is phasing in and out of his environment, what would be developed, but this is in fact his only appearance this episode. And after talking with Yaz, he walks off into the unknown and is never seen again. It would have been helpful to underline his situation by having him dissolve like a ghost and vanish into the ether. Yaz is approached by a priest triangle, who asks of her the same thing he asks of Vinda.
Can you repair?
Can I what?
All assistance is required.
It is revealed that Yaz has WWTDD written on the palm of her hand. What would the Doctor do? And on reading this, she is moved to say,
Yeah, I can. That's exactly why I'm here.
In the British Hotel, Mary Seacole is butting heads with General Logan, who is a bit of a drunk. When the Doctor arrives, she learns that General Logan intends to attack the Sontarans, and she advises against this. Seacole shows the Doctor to a captured Sontaran, Svild, who's under her care, and she explains that she's recorded observational information about him, including that he likes to take a rest for 7.5 minutes every 27 hours. This will become relevant later. The Doctor talks to Svild and says that she'll give up information on the whereabouts of the Doctor, pretending of course that she's not him, should his general agree to parley on her signal. He agrees, and the Doctor releases him so that they can follow to the hidden Sontaran encampment. Hidden because it's cloaked by a camouflage shield. On the other side, they discover several Sontaran ships and a multitude of Sontarans. Seacole is tasked with keeping records, as she has already done, to observe the encampment for every activity. General Skak is pleased to hear that the Doctor is in the Crimea, but is shamed by Svild's capture, and as a result he grants him mercy by execution. In Liverpool, Dan discovers that it was just 2 days ago, after a 3-minute eclipse, most likely a blackout caused by the Carvanista fleet surrounding the planet, the Sontarans landed. His parents also reveal that the Sontarans have a weak spot, a probic vent at the back of their neck, and that if given a good whack by a frying pan, can knock them out.
Want me to get all medical?
Dan is shown to the dock side, where the Sontaran stronghold is based. He decides to go in and see what he can do to stop them, armed with his father's wok. It would have been nice if this was an episode 4 in a traditional 12 or 13 episode series. The character work here is efficient but noticeably rushed, as we've not spent nearly enough time with Dan or his family to understand why they are so readily allowing their son to take on an alien war machine single-handed. In the temple, Yaz meets Vinda, and there is seemingly a spark of attraction between them. Vinda explains that the temple is the Temple of Atropos, and the Muri are the ones in need of repair. The priest triangle explains that they are guardian priests, assigned to protect the Muri, who are themselves charged by an unknown entity to keep a hold of time. I really like the description of time here as a force.
Time is distraction. The Mori are control. They must not break. Time must not be unleashed. Time is evil, and it will seek its own.
Down at the Liverpool docks, Dan witnesses the execution of so-called spying humans, trying to sneak into the Sontaran base. An unsettling and foreboding turn of events that don't seem to put Dan off, and only fuel him further as he climbs the ladder and tries to find his way aboard a ship. The Doctor uses her sonic screwdriver to send out a signal, calling General Skak to meet with her and parley before battle. When he realises that she is in fact the Doctor, he feels cheated. After a short conversation, we learn that the Sontarans snuck onto Earth moments before the Carvanista fleet surrounded the planet, and from there they began invading Earth's history, starting with the Crimea due to its quantity of bloodshed and opportunity, not to mention the fact that Skak, rather humorously, wanted to ride a horse. The Doctor tries to reason with Skak, but to no avail. Parley is halted by the arrival of General Logan, and the battle commences shortly after. The battle itself is an impressive sequence for Doctor Who, but shot in a way that shows war for what it actually is, a deeply depressing massacre, not glorious by any stretch of the imagination. At the Temple of Atropos, Swarm and Azure arrive and intimidate Yaz and Vinda. Swarm in particular is chilling, and seems to possess telepathic abilities, for he knows what is written on Yaz's palm. Azure flexes her powers, and turns not just one, but two priest triangles to dust. The pair show off their abilities to dodge laser beams when Vinda tries to kill them. This sequence also introduces a third character as part of Swarm's entourage, called Passenger, who remains unsettlingly quiet throughout. The Temple of Atropos is intriguing, don't get me wrong, but was it really necessary to have this, the Sontarans invading the Crimean War, and Sontarans in present-day Liverpool? If I wasn't so enamoured by the Sontarans themselves, or intrigued by Swarm and Azure, and how all this fits together, the episode would collapse under its own weight. And this is a problem, because with 4 more episodes to go, I know that if the story is not wrapped up in a satisfying way, it will impede my enjoyment of even this episode. And let me be clear, I did enjoy it. A lot. The Doctor and Mary brave the Sontaran stronghold and find a way into a Sontaran ship unnoticed. It must be said that for such a brilliant war machine such as the Sontarans, doing so should not be this easy. Not for the Doctor, and certainly not for Dan, who does the same in present-day Liverpool. For starters, you would think that the Sontaran ships would at least have guards present at all times. Failing that, security alarms. Further to this, military tactics such as working in shifts are commonplace, even on Earth. So again, this makes no sense whatsoever, and can only be a result of having to wrap up what should and could have been a whole episode onto itself. Even in this scene, where Dan touches a control panel and is instantly patched through to the Doctor, I was enjoying myself, but could see straight away that this made very little sense. Together, they work out that the Sontarans are building time ships to invade more of Earth's history, and that the Crimea is just a pilot scheme, there to beta test their plans before they work to dominate Earth from the dawn of time. The Doctor tells Dan that he must stop the first wave of Sontaran ships from leaving Liverpool, and therefore invading the past. But his resources are limited, and he has only a wok.
I'm sorry, what?
Finally, their transmission is intercepted, and what follows is a hilarious scene where Dan tricks a Sontaran into being incapacitated. But this is immediately undercut by Sontaran reinforcements who prepare to execute him for spying on them. He solemnly accepts his fate when Carvanista, who I must say is a very good boy, comes to save the day. In my reaction video, I suggested that by rearranging the scenes a little, Carvanista could have come in earlier and been responsible for connecting to the Doctor, not Dan's fumbling. Carvanista comes up with a plan to trigger a temporal implosion, wiping out the Sontarans by flying one of their ships into the other, but not before escaping and landing in the Mersey. The plan works, and the Sontaran occupation of Liverpool 2021 is ended. General Logan returns to the British Hotel in dire straits and asks for help. The Doctor, now armed with a pointy stick, educates both Logan and Seacole on a strategy to beat the Sontarans. She explains in a typically eccentric manner the Sontaran rest cycle of 7.5 minutes, see I told you this would become important, is because the Sontarans can't stand the toxic Earth atmosphere. Their protective suits work to filter out the poison air and replace them with homegrown Sontaran nutrients that run out after an extended period. Hence the rest cycle, and in this time they refill their suits from the ships via the probic vent. The Doctor's plan then is to sneak back into the Sontaran encampment, remove the supply of nutrients, and force them to run away. Again, I find it very convenient that the Sontarans don't stagger their rest cycles in shifts, as the problem would surely be identified and rectified early. Now, I know what you're thinking, because I'm thinking it too. Yes, it's great to have Chibnall pay off something that he set up earlier in the episode, but how will leaking all of this nutrients from the ships change anything? Because we established at the beginning of the episode that Svild, despite having a sleep cycle of exactly 7.5 minutes every 27 hours, because he was under the care of Mary Seacole, did not return to his ship, could not cleanse his filtration system, and was unaffected. So just to make myself clear, Svild could survive outside of the Sontaran ships for longer than 27 hours and just needed to lie down for 7.5 minutes. So I repeat, quite literally, why on earth would the Sontarans suddenly be affected and frightened enough to run all the way home? This just does not make sense. Nevertheless, the Doctor's plan works and the Sontarans flee. But before they do, a vengeful General Logan lights a fuse and he wipes out what appears to be an entire fleet. Why he didn't just try this before, I've no idea. Anyway, the Doctor is pretty angry at this and says,
"Sometimes men like you make me wonder why I bother with humanity."
But we've just seen Dan and Carvanista successfully wipe out their batch of Sontarans in a temporal implosion, which, forgive me if I'm wrong, is muchness of a muchness and effectively the same as blowing them all to hell. This is another clear example of the 13th Doctor's dodgy morality that so many have talked about. For example, a mercy kill is bad, but suffocating a whole cluster of spiders to death is apparently a-okay. I wish I could say that this trend is intentional, and that this is part of the character's story arc, but because many of her actions are met with appraisal from her friends and allies, I don't think it is. The TARDIS has decided to work again, and carries the Doctor away from this subverted timeline, back to Liverpool, back to the present day, back to Dan and Carvanista. The Doctor asks Dan if he would like to board the TARDIS, and go after Yaz, to which he says yes. Being the good boy that he is, Carvanista agrees to protect Earth in the Doctor's absence, but she warns him that she'll be back to deal with him, presumably with questions about the division. The TARDIS interior, though, is webbed and sickly. Someone hijacks the controls and flies it far across the universe to exactly where the Doctor wanted to go anyway. On arriving in the temple, she is met not by Yaz, but Azure. Inside the nave, she is welcomed sadistically by Swarm and his silent passenger. On activating the proximity detector, the Doctor is informed that the spectres she's seeing are the Muri.
In the Temple of Atropos, on the planet Time.
There is no planet called Time.
Yet here we are.
The news is startling, and Swarm is a joy to watch, as he reveals Yaz and Vinda as the short-term replacement of the Muri. Azure begins to count down from 5, and Swarm tells the Doctor that
I click my fingers, the full force of time will blast through them. How many seconds will their bodies be able to take before they die, Doctor?
the Doctor pleads.
You don't have to do this. Tell me what you want.
All in good time.
And the episode ends. This episode was a vast improvement on Chapter 1, but there were still plot contrivances that left me yearning for more than just 6 episodes. I want to know who Dan and Vinda are on a deeper level. I can't believe the Sontarans were defeated so easily either. To me, War of the Sontarans could have received full marks if only it had an episode all to itself. We didn't need Liverpool to be invaded. We probably could have waited for the temple as well. But still, I would be lying if I said I did not thoroughly enjoy myself. And I am increasingly excited for Chapter 3, Once Upon Time.